HR tech, work tech, and investment are transforming the future of work. Are you in the know? Welcome to the Work Tech Podcast. Join host George LaRock for expert insights on the trends, M&A activity, and strategies shaping the workplace. Brought to you by OneWorkTech.com and the Work-Defined Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Work Tech. It's George LaRock, and we've got a really interesting conversation for today. Our guest is Joe Shaker, the CEO of Shaker Recruitment Marketing. Most of you will know them as a full-service recruitment marketing agency. But if you ask any expert, any talent acquisition leader, any tech provider, or anyone in the industry who the leading recruitment marketing agencies are and who has a real impact on the industry, Shaker will likely be the first one mentioned. So nobody's been doing it as long or consistently with the biggest brands in the space as Shaker. So I'm excited to chat with Joe. Welcome, Joe.
Welcome. Hey, thanks, George. I appreciate that intro. Excited today. We appreciate the opportunity, and I know we're going to have a great conversation today. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, I go way not as far back as the company Shaker, but over 30 years in the industry, and I started on the staffing side, and then moved to the employer side after 4 or 5 years, and I can't remember where along the way, but just Shaker was just I know I had sent in inserts to a Shaker rep or two in a couple of places. At one point I had what would now be an RPO,
Sure.
And we were managing the process internally for a number of tech companies in the Boston areas, and Shaker was the agency of record in more than one.
What about a small world, huh? I mean, my first job, I could tell you, George, I mean, I don't want to give ages because then people can do the math and start working backwards, right? But I've been doing this for a long time. But as a kid, I would say one of my first jobs was to actually take the newspapers, and I was given an X-Acto knife. I still can't believe my father gave me a sharp edge. And I was put into the mailroom, and I'd get the insertion order, and I had to go open up the newspaper, find the ad, actually cut it out, paste it onto a proof of purchase, fold it 3 times, stuff it in the envelope, the amount of paper cuts I got during that process. So who knows? I might have even done that for some of your ads.
Yeah, that's great. But it really speaks to the amount of change, right? Thinking about those days, the amount of change that we've seen over the years and the industry has seen. And well, before I dig in, is there anything that I left out or anything that you'd like everyone to know about? And I want to make sure that I give you that opportunity.
No, I mean, I think your intro was great. I'm going to make sure my wife sees this recording so she can hear all those great words that you said about me. But no, I mean, this is all that I've ever done. I'm very passionate about our business and passionate about our industry. I am honored to sit in the seat that I am, to be able to work with, I believe, some of the greatest minds with my employees here at Shaker, and work with great partners and consultants and advisors like yourself, and have, I argue, one of the best set of clients in the industry. So my job is to get to spend a third with all 3 of those. So honored to be here, like I said, and I think that was great. Other than that, personally, I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old daughter, Lillian, and a 8-year-old daughter, Marion, and then my son, Joey, who's 6.
Wow. So your hands are full, no matter where you are.
If I'm not here, I'm at a ballet recital, a soccer field, or a baseball field.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar to me. So talk, back on that change. I feel like, we've had some major shifts, right? We went from newspapers to job boards. The industry went to SaaS. We had new ways of distributing ad content. But right now, it feels like with the shifts in the labor market, the sort of economic winds that don't seem to impact the job market the way they used to, the emergence of artificial intelligence, etc. This is a time when the change is it feels more acute to me. Am I leaving anything out, or how do you see this moment for recruitment marketing?
Yeah, I mean, what I've been saying, we have this conversation with many, how fast our industry is changing and evolving. I think there's so much has stayed the same. And I think the biggest thing where our industry has evolved and changed the most is that we're a leader in it. Historically, back in the times, I remember we used to follow other forms of classified automotive and real estate, and even in some cases consumer. And now our industry, from a marketing perspective, I think is at the forefront and is not lagging behind and leading. And so when you look at, and I kind of look at it, kind of like, let's look at the whole process, George, right? And it starts with brand, right? Historically, pre-employment brand days, right? Our job was to create compelling creative and sell the organization as best as we possibly could, right? To drive as many applications as we possibly could. Now, clearly that has changed, right? We still do and create compelling creative, but it has to be authentic and it has to be true, right? And so that's like, the nature at its core of what is truly employer branding is to get into the authenticity of that employer and no longer do, quote unquote, right, false advertising. So that's, has changed, or I like to say has grown up and has evolved. When you look at recruitment marketing, sure, right, print ads don't control, right, 95% of the market anymore, right? They're less than 5, in some cases 0. But it still is there's still no silver bullet, right, to your recruitment marketing tactics. You have to have a very diversified list of solutions to be able to drive in those applications targeting both active and passive. In a case in point, programmatic, right, isn't the end all be all. It is a big component, right, of your job board advertisement, and I believe is here to stay. But utilizing job boards in conjunction with display advertising and search engine marketing and social media, as well as sometimes, right, it's still going old school. And looking in those local markets to look at even billboard advertisements, or in some cases those local newspapers. And so that part, right, of our industry has evolved and changed and grown up, but also very similar. And then I believe too where we've evolved is around conversion and HR technology, right? Before we drove applications either to mail or to fax and we washed our hands from it. We did our job. Now, right, it doesn't stop at submission, right? We have to make sure that we are tracking those and we are converting. And I think this is also too where our industry is going. We are getting more efficient. We are getting smarter. It's no longer going in the dark hole. It's no longer at the disposal of the applicant tracking system. There's been a lot of really smart companies that have created solutions that sit at the front that make us more efficient, that make the media more accountable, and then obviously also hold the creative in its place as well. And so that's kind of like where, and when we look at this, it's like the connection between those three components, which is allow clients to truly be successful in their talent acquisition efforts.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. That was an incredible overview of how.
You're too nice to me, George.
I mean, it was call them as I see them, but I like the phrase that you use. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, the essence of what we're here to do is the same as far as finding people, finding the best people, finding them fast. Helping get them into the process and hired. But unpacking that a little bit, thinking about some of those changes, right? How people are finding jobs and engaging with jobs and applying for jobs. How things are shifting about what the conversation again. Some people think this is a new conversation, but the conversation again is shifting to quality of hire and what that means. That's been bubbling up. Do you give your clients, maybe there are two questions here. Are your clients focused on one of those areas more than another, or is there one really pressing issue? And then what advice do you give your clients to stay focused on, what really matters to drive that conversion?
I mean, it depends on how we're phrasing that question, right? Because if we do branding and do branding right, it should not drive more applicants. In theory, it should drive less applicants. So let's start with the front. because we should, repel the few. We should see an increase in retention because what we're saying to the market and the messaging in which we're saying what it's like to work here is true and authentic. And so not only will they convert, but then they also, in theory, right, should stay longer. So we should see an increase in retention. Yeah. When we're measuring recruitment marketing, we're looking at quality of applicant, in my opinion, in real time. And what is definition of quality applicant? Everyone has a different definition of that as well. For when clients ask us, our interpretation of that is interview scheduled. If the media, right, are driving applications to the door and the candidates want to move forward and the organization also wants to move forward with them, in that exact moment, right, those quote-unquote media partners should be rewarded for driving more of those. And then it becomes a numbers game. The message at the forefront, right, should clean the retention. If we're getting quality applicants in the funnel, what historically was 20 applications to get to the hire, I want to get it down to 10, right, to 5, to ultimately, right, which is really what the clients want, one job, one application, one hire. I don't think it's going to be a long time until that actually comes into fruition, but if we can start to bring those numbers down, it's not just more efficiencies, it's significant cost savings to the bottom line for our organizations and their marketing needs.
Yeah, and that's technology can come into play throughout that whole process on your side, on the client side.
Yep.
And there's a lot of hype around the technology right now.
Sure.
It's multiple hype cycles. Even within the AI hype cycle, it started out, AI, sort of core AI, machine learning, then it's generative, now it's agentic. And how do you balance that technology? Because your website, and when we've had conversations before, you talk a lot about relationships.
Yep.
How do those things balance in today's market?
Yeah, I mean, when I tell clients, right, and many organizations come in, they say, I want to spend 100% of my budget on HR tech, right? They see that shiny object. Same thing, I have an employee brand, so let's move away from tech for a second. I have a budget and I want to spend it all, go all in on employer branding or go all in on, search engine marketing. And I think it's really dangerous, right, for organizations to go all in on each one of those categories. What we want to do is you want to take that peanut butter and spread it, not too thin, right, but be able to get exposure in each of those buckets. So the one advice before we even talk about HR tech, right, the question is, what are you trying to accomplish or what are we trying to achieve, right? And then from there we can try to figure out how to frame the budget across those areas to make sure that we can kind of hit the objectives that our clients are looking to reach, but also create the efficiencies that they need. Where I think technology, has played an important role in this process. No one had the teams, right? You talk about candidate experience, which I coined Jerry Crispin, really, in Career Crossroads, and the work that they've done in terms of elevating candidate experience. I'm going back over a decade, right? The issue was, how can we get to candidates in a very efficient and time-efficient way without hiring large amounts of teams to be able to process those applications? And that's where I think technology is helping. Technology, right, is helping us create that better experience so that we can assess candidates, through no different than knockout questions, right? In many cases, that's what the tech is doing. We're going back to the old days where you had those knockout questions. But in real time, we can ask those questions that are going to be a deal breaker for the employer as well as a deal breaker for the candidate. And then start that dialogue to immediately informs the candidate, you know what, this isn't going to be a good fit for you, and vice versa. And then, instead of that candidate going in this holding pattern, right, what happens, right? Again, through technology and a lot of great advancements there, we can start to automatically schedule. And so getting rid of that back and forth of that process, which is also time. And we know, right, the stat that Indeed in Glassdoor site, candidates apply to one, they apply to 18 jobs. No one wants to apply to 18 jobs, right? They apply into 18 jobs because they're trying to fill their funnel, candidates.
Yep.
But if a candidate applies to a job, and what we're starting to see, and in real time, is getting dispositioned into interview scheduled, and that interview is getting scheduled within 24 to 48 hours, they're not going to go apply to other jobs. And so now that moment of time, right, that candidate's locked in with that employer. It's a good experience for the candidate, but it's even better for the employer. And that's where I think, where if you use the tech and use it wisely, it's producing great return for our clients.
Yeah, I love that that you're balancing both the candidate and the employer side, and that sort of locking in that the way you frame that. I haven't heard anyone really talk about that. It's more about process, speed.
Yeah. I mean, it's
which is important, but
it's consumer, right? And if you look at consumer advertising, who's at the forefront, right? The consumer, the customer. Yep. You want to make that easy, efficient process, and whoever does that, right, wins the consumer. Well, our consumer is the candidate, and you have to put them, again, front and center. And that's kind of hearing what is putting them at the forefront and listening to what our clients' objectives are and making that match is how you're successful.
Yeah. So with all of that, there's so many decisions to make. How can a brand stand out? Where where should their brand be present, or how have things shifted in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think where a brand can make themselves stand out is following the data. That's something we have not yet talked about in the session. It's nothing's set in stone. The other thing that has changed, right, over the time is budgets can be completely flexible. Media, whether it be paper performance or not, in many cases are in a non-committal fashion. And that's a huge advantage, right? Gone are the days of, setting dollars and, at December and not looking at it until next December, right? Where a client really can get smart is with that flexibility and fluidity in that budget is let data fuel those decisions and move to not what your gut is saying, but what the data is saying. And do we need to make changes creatively, or do we need to reward media A versus media B? Is the creative working, the media is working, but ultimately we're still not seeing conversion? Well, then that might be a time to really take a look at that whole entire client experience, aka also the tech stack. And that's kind of, I think, what makes you a more informed decision-making process. And so I'd say listen to your advisors and listen to the data and make decisions in real time, knowing that you can always change back.
Yeah. That. Do you factor in the data that I think you were referencing is sort of what's happening in that? I always view it as an experiment. Like we're going out with a great hypothesis with this campaign or a series of campaigns, and now let's see what happens and adjust. Is there market labor market data, or is that all part of it?
It's a good question, right? We get asked that. Of course there is, right? And that you can use that as in your preliminary hypothesis. And then obviously we work with a lot of clients. We have baseline data. A lot of other partners, right, put out baseline data, even on the media side as well as on the partner side. But you really got to look at your data. I mean, in my opinion, personally, just company A to company B, right? You have a different brand. You also have a different apply process, right? And so one might be more efficient than the others. So I would caution, right, for those that are just using the generality data, right? You can make some informed decisions, but really what you want to get at is get into your own data and be able to follow that versus obviously relying on others, because there's so many differences between who you are as an organization, the brand of the organization, are you well known or not well known in that specific industry, and then also kind of your process versus another client can easily deter up or down in terms of what the baseline metrics show.
Yeah. And, I framed Shaker as working with the biggest brands in the market, but you've got a really big ICP, right? We
work with companies of all shapes and sizes, right? Mid-sized to obviously some of the largest enterprises in the U.S. or for that matter the globe. But we work with companies of all shapes and sizes.
Yeah. And that's everything we said in the 90s about the world getting flat, competing for talent and business with companies down the street and around the world. That's been true for a while now.
Yep.
Are there differences in how this advice for one of your middle-sized companies versus, the bigger brands attract candidates with their capital B brand?
Yep.
How do you advise those smaller shops in this world?
The process is the same, right? Because even a small brand, right, needs to rely on a brand of the organization and tell them what it's like to work for them. The difference is really for some of those maybe smaller to mid-size, right? They're not going to have any brand awareness, right? Where some other companies, I always say this isn't Field of Dreams. If you build it, they'll come. Some of our larger employers, right, enterprise, right, do have a little bit of that kind of process, or quote unquote organic that comes to them. Some of the smaller to mid-size aren't going to have that. So they're going to be a little bit more aggressive to kind of pushing applicants top of funnel. But even for our largest employers out there that do have that awareness and have that organic, you still can't rely just on that. So they still have to be aggressive, and I believe be at the forefront to drive applicants in. But other than that, it's a very similar process, just smaller scale, right?
Yep. So I ask everyone, this is what everybody asks me, how's the market right now? And you take that any way you like. What do you see out there? How's the market?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure when you ask the question, I'm sure the number one answer you get is unpredictable. Now post-election, and we have an answer. There's still some certainty, but still a lot of uncertainty, right, in that question. I'm optimistic, though, George. I mean, I've attended to a lot of economic sessions from economists across from the partner side. And even in a market that is unpredictable in pre-election, right, where most companies kind of pull back and stop hiring completely, employers are still moving forward. Sure, not the same clip as they were the year before or 2 years, but they're still hiring. And they're still optimistic in terms of kind of current state and where the future is. And I still think, right, where we saw a little bit of it during the COVID era, right, there is a war for talent, right? There's going to be a shortage. There is an aging population, and there's a population that's replacing them that's a lot smaller. And no matter which way you slice it or dice it, right, that is a real problem that's still facing some of our clients, right? Case in point in the healthcare industry, and in some cases even in some retail hospitality sector. And that's not going to go away tomorrow or a year from now or 2 years. It's unfortunately going to even get harder and harder. And so companies can't really take their foot off the gas. They even have to continue to brand themselves, because if they don't need an exact need today, they know within a short amount of time period they are going to need some assistance there.
Yep. Speaking of rebrands, just to note, you've actually do you consider it a rebrand, or did you recast the brand? Or refresh. It looks great.
It's a refresh, right?
There you go.
Our brand has been around for a long time. Gina, we didn't do it. It's not a new brand, right? It's a refresh, obviously, to our current brand. And we really are honing in and highlighting as being an advisor in the space, being an extension to our organization's needs, and focusing in on those core areas: branding, recruitment, marketing, technology, consultation, and obviously metrics. But really wanted to preface and kind of really bring to light where our, how do we get here and how we've been around for 7 decades. And like I said at the start, right, it's hiring really smart people. As I said at the beginning, we have, I argue, some of the best in the business. And then forming really great partnerships in the media side and the creative side, as well as in the, of course, in the technology side. And then have some of the greatest clients out there, and bringing those together. That's our job.
Yeah. So maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. I'm curious what's next for Shaker? What are you thinking about, right? Given everything we just talked about, and where the business and the market is today, what are you thinking about, like, moving forward as you look ahead?
Well, this week I'm trying to make sure I don't set my house on fire when I deep fry the turkey. So that's my number one priority after this. I got to make sure I don't burn down the house. Strengthening, George, who we are. We're not changing. We are who we are. We believe we have a good position in the marketplace. And it's doubling down on that and kind of bringing to light. If there's one thing, I guess, that we have changed, we haven't been out there as much before, and we're attending more conferences, doing more marketing, doing more branding, and telling our story, not just to clients, but also to hopefully potential employees, and obviously for greater partnerships. So the marketing of this isn't just business driven from a client acquisition. It's for purposes also for our own recruiting needs, as we're still hiring out there. Can I make that mention out here? As well as forming more partnerships. And that's kind of where we're going, and kind of, being who we are and carving ourselves out in that space.
Yeah. So what's the what's the best way for folks to stay on top of all that?
You can follow us on LinkedIn. Obviously feel free to connect with myself. But obviously, if you haven't already, please do follow us on LinkedIn. You get real-time updates on kind of where we're at and things we're doing, examples of client work, etc. So I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best place to kind of be able to follow us. But feel free to reach out to us as well, and myself included.
Yep, that's great. I want to thank you so much, because at this end of the year, as we're rolling through this part of the calendar, I know time gets really short. And thank you for giving this time to me and to WorkTech in the community here. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, hey, I'm happy to anytime, and it's always good to catch up with you. And I appreciate you as well, and I hope you and your family have a great Thanksgiving. And thank you for the time and opportunity to share a little bit about Shaker.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And thanks to everybody listening, watching out on the Work-Defined Network or YouTube or at WorkTech. And until next time.
Take care, George.
You too.